Well, I had to talk about this because I am a massive fan of this franchise, I guess you could call it. But the first official trailer for the Witcher Netflix series debuted at San Diego Comic-Con. Have you guys both seen it? I just want to make
Yeah.
sure that's okay. Good. So this will be a good discussion.
We watched it on the PvA Nightly Rundown every weeknight over here at 9 p.m.
Plug. Yeah, so there's a lot of exciting stuff to talk about with the trailer, and I'll kind of take this discussion in a variety of directions. But I just want to preface this by saying that I am cheating a little bit. We talk about gaming stuff on this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
This is technically not an adaptation of a video game, as
Mm-hmm.
many people are saying, which
Mm-hmm.
will be part of our discussion. It is an adaptation of the Polish book series, which were then adapted into a very terrible Polish television movie and into the games we all know and love as well. And so kind of in line with that, I want to talk about what are your levels of engagement with The Witcher as a franchise, either as a book series or as a game series?
So I got like super heavy into The Witcher 3, and it was my game that I would like play for a couple months and then put down and then come back to, and it just like kept calling me back. So it took me 3 years to beat it, but I loved every single minute of it. But that's the only experience I have is with The Witcher 3, which is what I imagine the majority of the audience of this show is going to be.
Yes.
So I've played a majority of my experiences with The Witcher 3 as well. I still haven't actually finished it, and it's one that I know I'm just going to keep coming back to and playing in little chunks. I love it. I mean, I will say that I love the world and I love the characters and I love all that stuff about it. It's just one that I know is going to take. If I were to sit down and play through it, it's going to take so much time, and it's because it's one I want to do all the side quests for and all this other stuff. So I know it's going to be. I'm going to be playing it off and on for years. But when I did hear that the Netflix series was going to be not based on the game, but more on the books, I kind of wanted to get familiar with that too. So I did start reading the books. Now I'm very early in that, like less than 100 pages into the first one. So I'm not super far. But that's pretty much the extent of all my stuff. But nevertheless, I'm so excited for the TV show. It looks so good.
Yeah.
It's perfect.
I too would like to get into the books, which is why I have now started to learn how to read.
Well, it's good that you're starting with
baby steps.
Polish book series at least. Yeah, baby steps.
Yeah, that's right.
It's great to hear that you've at least started to engage with the books. I have not read the books, but I've played I've played the 3 games, the 3 Witcher games. Definitely 3. I invested the most time into 3, and it is. I mean, I've said before, it's one of my favorite games of all time. I love that world. I understand why people would want to take their time with it because it's kind of like a good book or a good television series. You don't really want to whip through it, but you find yourself whipping through it regardless, just because you're so invested in it, in that world and in those characters. And so it's great that we kind of have varying levels of engagement with the series. I think it'll kind of inform the discussion we'll have. And so I do want to talk about the trailer before we dive into what the trailer means and kind of what this series means as a whole for Netflix and for adaptations of this kind. What are your thoughts on the series? I know, Luke, you had talked about this a little bit on on the PvA Nightly Rundown, so you can feel free to expand your thoughts. But did you guys love the trailer, like it, have some concerns or praises for the trailer? What were your thoughts?
I was overall I was pretty excited about it. It was different seeing the different interpretations of showing the characters and everything. Because I mean, even though they're saying, hey, it's not based on the games, you still have that imprinted into you because that's like the visual representation of all these characters. So it is a little bit of getting around that, but still, like I thought it was really great. Set a good tone for what the world is going to be like. I like that they didn't go heavy on the monsters quite yet, which I'm assuming is because they're still developing what they're going to look like. But I hope also that they keep some kind of mystery around them too, so you don't really see like you get into the first episode and then that's when you see the reveal of like one of the big classic monsters and you're like, oh, okay, all right, I'm into this, as being like that one way to grab. But especially the final shot at the end where he's all up on his potions and everything, I was just like, oh, this is gonna be sweet.
Yeah, it is jarring to see these interpretations of these characters, especially like Siri. I didn't really put two and two together at first that's who that was. When they released images of them, it made sense in the trailer. But but you're right, Jarrett. When like you're reading a book, so like you're getting into the books after you've played through parts of the game, right? And so when you're reading it, you're envisioning these characters that you've been reading about. I was the same way with Game of Thrones, right? And there are characters in the Game of Thrones television series that look totally different than the way they're described in the books. But yet, despite that, I still go into it with this mental image, right? And so, and we talked a little bit about this with the Avengers game as well. Like when you get this idea of what these characters are supposed to be like, what they look like, when something comes along the lines and it's not quite right, it doesn't quite look like the way that you're used to, there's something extremely jarring about it. And so I'm with you on all of those things, but as far as the trailer goes, I think that they hit all the right notes in terms of just like the tone that I want to see from the show. It seems to be very dialogue driven, which is something that I love about the games. Very character focused, which I know is something about the series that everybody loves. And so I'm really, I thought that was great. And I also thought that I was like, this is the perfect time for this because people are clamoring for fantasy stuff. And Game of Thrones proved that, and not just Game of Thrones, the Lord of the Rings trilogy as well, like have proved that this is more than just this is more than just nerdy shit. Like we can do cool things in these universes that are going to appeal to a mass audience, and that's why Netflix was smart to jump on the Witcher train because of how popular that series has become, and it's why Amazon it's doing Lord of the Rings. Popped off mentions in the chat the Lord of the Rings TV show as well. Like everybody wants to be the next thing after Game of Thrones to capture people's attention. And I think given the ending of Game of Thrones and how disappointing it was to many people, I think they're ready to throw themselves back into something that will hopefully pay off a bit more.
Yeah, I'm fully going into this wanting it to be my Game of Thrones replacement. Like that's just kind of like ever since it was announced, I was like, okay, well that's it. I know what to look forward to now after Game of Thrones ends. And hopefully that's not putting too high of a bar on it. I mean, I think especially, Henry Cavill is probably by far the biggest name on their ticket of actors and everything like that. So, but still, like getting somebody like him attached to it is I feel like speaks to the the level of quality it's going to be. And so I hope that it doesn't let us down in some of the same ways as Game of Thrones did. But I'm pretty easy to please. I was still pretty happy with Game of Thrones too up through the end. So I'm just like, yeah, sure, give me more of this thing I love. I'm not going to be mad about it.
Yeah, you guys are. It's great. You guys are jumping right to where I want you to. But before we talk about Netflix because I think Netflix is an important part of this discussion. You're totally right. It's the perfect timing, and I think probably both to its detriment and to its benefit, this will be labeled in the lead up as kind of the next Game of Thrones or the next for the crown of whatever Game of Thrones put down. In some ways I'm conflicted about the trailer because I think it nailed what I like about the series, and in some ways it missed what I like about the series. At least the games, which is again all I can speak to. It's hitting all the boxes for what people loved about Game of Thrones. Sorry, I timed out there for a second. It's hitting all the boxes of what people love about Game of Thrones. It's got sex, it's got violence, it's got human drama, and it's got a very sexy lead character.
It's gonna have a Geralt bathtub scene,
dude.
I'm looking forward to it.
We're gonna dedicate an entire 30 minutes to that discussion. But there's a lot in the trailer that kind of indicates that they understand the series. It's like you guys said, the way it's shot, the cinematography evokes kind of that dark fantasy that Game of Thrones fans love, but also that's very particular to The Witcher, kind of like a very dark Grimm's fairy tale-esque version of fantasy, which I love and really connected with. Um, I think Henry Cavill only has one line in the trailer, which based on what the interviews that they had at the Comic-Con panel is interesting because they noted that when he came on board, they actually limited the amount of dialogue that Geralt was speaking because he was able to communicate more with like the raise of an eyebrow or the kind of a grunt than he was with words, which is fine with me. I'm not a huge fan of Henry Cavill, so the less he talks, the better, in my opinion. And I think Geralt as a character in the despite the fact that the games are highly dialogue driven, he does not always talk the most in every scene.
Mhm.
He'll sometimes have very curt, very sarcastic answers, which is great for a lead character to have. He can be kind of reactive while everybody else around him kind of initiates. The one thing I will say about the trailer, and it's I admit a very minor complaint and one that I cannot levy until I see the entire show. There's something about the music, especially in Witcher 3, that is very specific
Mhm.
to Eastern Europe and Eastern European folk music, and I hope that that is something that they incorporate into the show a little bit more. At least the song we heard in the trailer was fine. It was kind of very bombastic, standard kind of fantasy fare, but I hope they incorporate more like the local flavor of kind of the Polishness and the Eastern Europeanness that kind of gives it The Witcher a very specific sense of place and sense of tone. Again, that's not something I can complain about until we see the series, and I'm sure the music will be great.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was actually going to say, I'm pretty sure I'm doing a Google check on it right now, but I'm
Okay.
pretty sure I saw the composers of the series came out and said that the trailer music is not
Okay,
the score. It's just a piece of music they use for the
cool.
trailer.
That's good.
That's an interesting choice though.
It is.
But
Yeah,
unless
I
it's
get
not
it, but
done.
that which could very
That's
well. I
possible.
mean, again, we're looking at it. They're saying like what, late 2019? Like I
It's gonna
think
be fall.
November.
Yeah,
Yeah,
fall
yeah, that's kind of
2019.
what they were throwing around. So I mean, yeah, they kind of got to get it together. But I agree with you on that one. Like the music of especially Witcher 3 soundtrack is one of my favorites.
Yeah,
Because the different all parts of it and just how much range it has is fantastic. But it's kind of the thing though. I wonder if it'll be like early seasons of Game of Thrones again to draw a comparison there. I went back and watched some of the earlier stuff, like season 1 stuff of Game of Thrones, and the music there sounds very like compared to end seasons, so much lower budget than what they had. So I wonder if it's one of those things like as the show goes on and gets better, if they will. I mean, granted, yes, like you said, we haven't heard it yet, we don't know, but still I wonder if it's one of those things that will increase in quality as the time of the show goes on.
yeah. Hopefully, I think it would be a big missed opportunity because they do want to like if you want to distinguish it from Game of Thrones, that's a great way to do it.
Mhm.
And The Witcher is different in that regard. It's very specific to a very particular cultural text and cultural background that they're pulling from. So I hope they kind of double down on that. That would be really cool.
Oh, yeah.
But I do want to talk about kind of what you guys were referencing in your comments, which is I think Netflix is obviously angling for something super big here. And whether or not they pull it off has yet to be seen. It's interesting to note that I think this is in a unique position for an adaptation in that most of the people who will be watching it are coming having already been fans of another adaptation of it. That's a unique position to be in. And they're not familiar, they may not be familiar with the source material itself, but they're familiar with an offshoot of the source material. And it'll probably direct many people to the books. I'm sure, like yourself, people are probably trying to cram in all the books before it debuts this fall. But it puts it in a unique position. It puts Netflix in a unique position to try to market this to not only fans of the games and fans of the books, but newcomers as well. Do you think this trailer did a good job of, I guess, pitching this to people who might not be familiar with The Witcher?
In the chat, Roy Speedrun, just to to mention this. He
Yeah.
says it's a little bit of a cop out for them to say it's not based on the games. I think the show would never have existed without the game. To be honest, not to say it'll be bad, a bad
That's
show,
true.
but bit of a cop out. And I agree that the show wouldn't exist without The Witcher 3, the game.
100%.
And there was enough success around the franchise from that game that the creators of that franchise tried to renege on some deals. But I think it's an interesting choice that it's not based on the games because of that reason, right? And I think that it's a very calculated move that Netflix has decided to make to not make it adjacent with the games. And we've talked about it a lot on this podcast that the gaming culture and the community around gaming is kind of a difficult to control beast, right? And while Roy Speedrun uses the word cop out, I see it more as like a really clever way of sidestepping this community that tends to be really vitriolic if you don't do things the exact right way. More so than I think in really any other outside of maybe like Star Wars, right?
Yeah. You already sort of saw this.
Yes.
When in the trailers, he doesn't have two swords on his back like he does in the game, which this is the perfect example of one toxic fandom getting beaten down by another toxic fandom. Because then everybody who's read the books are quick to point out the fact that he does not have both swords on his back in the books. He puts one on Roach, who casting of Roach, perfect. And so it's a really, I think you're right. It's a way to kind of bypass or sidestep that conversation in a really interesting way. And I don't think they're going to ignore the games totally. I think they have a rich and broad text to draw from. I think they will draw some elements of the games in. Whether or not they can actually legally use the creatures that CD Projekt Red made up is another question, because they have the rights to the books, but CD Projekt Red made up a bunch of creatures of their own for the games. So I think that's an interesting line they'll have to toe. But it's true. I think it's a great way to kind of bypass a community that can be super vitriolic, as you said.
And the marketing is brilliant. That first image of Geralt in costume, not the screen test, but the one with him facing out and the one sword on his back, that was not an accident.
No,
they picked an image that they knew would get people saying, why doesn't he have two swords, so that they could immediately establish the baseline that you fucking idiots that haven't read the book that have things to say about this, he only has one sword on him and he keeps the other on Roach. That was not an accident.
No,
they did that completely on purpose, and I think that it's brilliant. Same thing happened with his beard. Did you guys see this week the official Xbox account tweeted at Netflix and was like, "Where's Geralt's beard?"
Oh no!
And one of the Netflix accounts responded and said, maybe he left it at home with the books.
Netflix's social media accounts are very sassy.
And
that's good. That's good.
I just think it's calculated. I think it's smart.
Yeah. No. I mean, I think they're gonna do really good. And especially too with having the different swords like May 2, that sets up a story point of explaining it to the people, helping the people who haven't played the games, and again to get in the new people, the new audience who I'm sure the trailer has attracted, explaining this world to them that we've all had the benefit of having the books in the movie and the books in the game, to go back on and to pull from as we're getting excited about this as the new show.
Definitely.
Do you also think that it could have been a part on the series creators, that they saw how successful the game was and yet people were still super unaware that the books even existed? That when Netflix approached them wanting to use this world as the source material for a show they were doing, they said, yes, but we want you to stay true to it, so to what we've created, so that people will know the books that we've created exist. I can't tell if Cody's contemplating or lagging out here.
No, I was contemplating. I lagged out though. I think there were comments from the creator, the showrunner. I think her name is Lauren Heesrick, I want to say.
I think that's right. Yeah.
She said that Netflix, when she came to Netflix to kind of try to express interest in this idea, that she had a very specific vision that was very in the books. I honestly think the books probably give them a broader like base to build from than the games do in some ways.
Mhm.
They're just I mean they're just numerically there are a lot of them, and there's an entire world to explore there. The games I think are a little bit more limited in terms of the stories they tell, at least across the 3 games. Obviously there's a rich world and backstory to all of them, but I think it was a smart decision to go with the books. I think it gives them the freedom to draw from the entirety of the lore and the entirety of the world that's been established, and maybe correct some of the mistakes that were made in the books and were made in the games, because they have the benefit of hindsight to kind of see where the overall arc of the narrative is going. I just think it's a really smart idea, and I think, to what you said, Jared, I think the trailer probably did bring in a lot of people who were just like, "This looks like Game of Thrones. I don't totally understand everything that's going on. This dude looks like a Targaryen, and he's wielding a sword. Let me give it a shot when it
Half
comes
the
out."
viewership is going to be people thinking it's the Game of Thrones prequel, and then they're like, wait, what is this?
Exactly. It's not a bad place to be in. I'm sure Netflix wouldn't be upset to get those viewers either.
Well, and I wonder too if part of the draw for it going to the books is also because of the recent, since the author he sold the rights basically to the game to CD
Mhm.
Projekt Red for such a low amount, and then so I'm sure they still had to get some sign off from him, even if they had gone with the games version of the show for the show. And so, so I wonder. Then he's like, no, 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 no. We're gonna, if that was part of the discussion too, like, no, let's bring it back to my material, please, and do that kind of
Yeah,
stuff, because he sued, right, to try to get extra
he
compensation
did,
Mhm.
yeah.
from CD Projekt Red. Yeah,
And he's a
uh,
consultant on the show too.
right. So I'm sure. I wonder if that was part of it too. And but hopefully, we don't run into another George R. Martin situation there where he's like, oh, they're not finished. But aren't the books though even more of an anthology series than a straight linear story
They
kind of
are,
thing?
I think, and I think the series, as far as I know, is based on like the original short stories that he had written.
Hmm,
Which is, I think it'll be interesting to see how they weave like kind of like a monster of the week like side quest feel with the overarching narrative.
right.
I love. I think we all love The Witcher 3, at least the one we've all played, as much for the side quests as we do like the main through line. And I think it excels at telling those smaller scale stories. So it'll be interesting to see how they weave those in as well.
Yeah, well, and just really quickly back to the decision to go with the books, like we're all familiar with the game The Witcher 3. Like we're in that we are thrown into the middle of a narrative, and there is a very grand scale political story that's
Yes.
happened, multiple political stories that have happened in this world that we're being dropped into, that I still don't feel like I can fully appreciate the narrative of The Witcher without the Witcher 3 without the understanding of what's happened in those other games. They did a great job of creating something that was relatively self-contained given the amount of material that existed before it. But regardless of what, if they decided to go with the video game series, we'd still be getting material that we weren't quite familiar with, because I doubt they would just pick it right up at the where The Witcher 3 is.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah, The Witcher 3 is already plenty into Geralt's. Like, it's an older Geralt. We're seeing a younger Geralt in the show, which I think will actually be interesting for players of the game as well. It's a
Mhm.
different version of Geralt. It's a much younger version of Yennefer and Ciri. So I think it'll be interesting for everybody involved, all kinds of viewers.
Yep.
Um, I do want to quickly talk about kind of, not quickly, but I guess let's talk about Netflix and all this. I think it's unavoidable that uh, Netflix, we heard this week, kind of had a pretty serious decrease or downturn in their subscribers. Um, it's no secret that they invest a lot in their original content, sometimes to the detriment of their revenue. And I think the format of Netflix in general is kind of a binge watching model will be interesting for this show that is being compared to a Game of Thrones. Um, Game of Thrones and HBO, the standard release model, worked really well for Game of Thrones, it was event viewing on Sundays. It was it was the last in a probably for a long time of that kind of event viewing. And The Witcher on Netflix sort of doesn't engage with that. It'll all be dumped at the same time, much like anything on Netflix, Stranger Things, Narcos. Um, do you guys think
Fuller
Netflix is?
House.
Of course, how could I forget the classic
Top-tier
Fuller
content.
House? Do you guys think Netflix is the right place for this kind of series? That the kind of series that they're trying to build this as?
I would love to see Netflix start adopting more of that like event viewing, kind of like they do with like Hulu does with
Yeah, exactly.
Handmaid's Tale and a couple of their other
Mhm.
series, I believe. Dang it. I was trying to. There's some like reality TV show that they release 5 episodes a week of that one of my friends was talking to me about today. He's like, dude, I love it. It's like UK Love Island or something. They need to, but I wish they would adopt that kind of model for a show like this, where if the way the narrative is weaved in the games is any indication, which I know the lore is at least somewhat based off the books, like
Mhm.
these are really big stories that are being told that are likely going to have a lot of moving parts. And I don't know if this is necessarily a show you're going to be able to appreciate by sitting down and watching. How many episodes is it? 8?
Yeah.
8 straight hours of. Like,
Yeah.
I would much rather want to have the time to sit, watch, have discussions, process it, because that's what made Game of Thrones great, was not just being able to watch it one week at a time, but I could watch it and then I could talk to Cody or my buddy Seth about it, my wife about it, go read the Reddit threads, and there was like a discussion going on around it. Whereas like with Stranger Things, the hype lived for a week in the lead up and a week after the release, and now we've moved on. And I
Mhm.
just don't know if that model's sustainable in the long run, both from a revenue standpoint, because everybody's like, I'll just pay for the subscription when a show comes out when I want it, watch it all, and then drop it. And I just don't know if it works from this show's perspective, given the nature of what I believe the story is going to be.
Yeah. I think I think it would work. I think especially it works being that it's a new in air quotes,
Mhm.
like a property basically for TV anyway. And I think it'll work for that because I think it'll be everybody has the Netflix account pretty much or has access to somebody's Netflix account where they could watch it if they're interested, which then could potentially do that. I think the only other place that I really would have been happy seeing it probably would have been HBO, but I mean you can't just turn around and have Game of Thrones and then immediately launch your next huge same time period esque
Yeah.
fantasy series. Like they're being smart by doing His Dark Materials next as being their next big fantasy thing. But um, I think it'll be fine. I think though, I don't think it would hurt it though if Netflix were to adopt the weekly release. I think that would help it have a bit more life for everything. Or maybe they like I don't know did something where the first 2-3 episodes they dropped all at once, then the rest they spaced out or something like that. I mean, it's just kind of annoying. I get both sides of the argument, but I also see that it's like, we're already going back to having to have 10 different streaming services to
Mhm.
watch all the different shows we want. Like we're just going back to how it was before. Just give us the weekly commercial, the weekly show, weekly episode release. We'll learn to love it again.
Yeah, I totally that's the side that I fall closer to. I would have loved to see this as like a proper eventized 8 episode kind of series.
Mhm.
Obviously, HBO is probably not the right place for it, but Showtime is really building up its stable of original shows.
Yeah,
It's
that's
already
true.
diving into the video game space with Halo, so it would have been cool to kind of see them double up. Um, but I just think for Game of Thrones, it worked exceptionally well. It was essentially the Super Bowl every Sunday. It basically it would in the week following it was a buildup of anticipation and a buildup of conversation, picking apart every single detail, and that just doesn't really work when all 8 episodes are there to digest. You're able to digest it all at once and kind of analyze it all at once, but that level of anticipation is kind of diminished, like you said, Luke. That for media outlets and for people on Reddit and for people on their own private Discord channels, it does kind of decrease the window of engagement and the window of conversation. Um, so we'll see. I mean, from all that I'm hearing and from all that I'm seeing, it seems like this could be, if it's great, could be a big hit for Netflix. Netflix. I think I do just want to say I think the 8-episode order is perfect. Netflix has a reputation for its shows going on a little bit too long. Like all the Marvel Netflix shows, Narcos, are all at least 2 episodes too long.
Yeah.
And so to see them kind of limiting it, probably because of budgetary reasons, but limiting it to 8 episodes, I think is great for the story they're trying to tell. And based on what the showrunner has said, she's not interested in packing everything into those 8 episodes, but kind of giving it room to breathe and building character, which is how a show like this succeeds.
Yeah. It's going to be good.
I hope so, man.
I do too. I really do. I'm putting a lot of stock into it, but hopefully I won't be let down.
Yeah.